All right, let me invite you to turn in your Bibles to Mark chapter 12. We'll look at verse 13. The title of the message this morning is Back to the God of the Bible. When I just graduated from college, I became a Christian at the senior year in my college career back in 1993. And right after college, I had a degree in family and social services. I went into social work. And as a young Christian, I didn't know how much to think about issues from a biblical perspective. I didn't understand that I should take every issue back to the Bible, back to the God of the Bible. During those days, I had to take mandatory workshops. These mandatory workshops included diversity training, gang-related issues, drug-related issues, grant writing, and other health and social service topics. But I remember one workshop about messaging. The workshop was on messaging and how you were supposed to act and speak when you were speaking to the media about your company or about your cause. We were supposed to stay on topic. We were supposed to sound like a broken record if necessary when communicating with the media so that you might gain public support or financial support. So they were pretty sharp. They were astute in training those in the social service field. But since then, I've learned that whenever you are confronted by the media or confronted with an issue, you have three choices. You can roll over, you can react, or you can reframe. To roll over is to ignore the problem and hope it goes away. To react is what most of us do. Defensively, reactively, it's a default position. But unfortunately, when you react, you lose control of the dialogue. But the best choice, the optimum choice, is to refrain. Reframe. The third choice requires you to be focused. It requires you to be courageous, to stay on task, to stay on the matter at hand. And this implies that you have a message to get across to those who are listening. And this is partly what Jesus meant when he said we should be wise as serpents and gentle as doves. The ability to be wise enough to survive like a serpent. He knows how to live. He knows how to survive. He knows where to hide. To be wise as serpents and to be gentle as doves. Let me give you a modern example, because we're going to get into a hot topic in our text today about government and about authority. Here's a more modern example from Campus Crusade for Christ. Back in 1994, Brad Bright and Campus Crusade for Christ had to draw on this truth in real life when they encountered a young man named Todd, a student of the University of Washington in Seattle. Todd came up to a Campus Crusade for Christ information table and wanted to join a Bible study. And the female college student attending the table said he could. Todd also shared he was gay and asked if he would still be able to join. She gave him the unexpected answer, "Of course, yes, you may." His next question gave him the answer he was looking for all along. He asked, "Is there anything I would not be allowed to do because of being gay?" She said that as long as he engaged in homosexual behavior, he could not hold the position of leadership. And Todd parted saying that he was offended. The next day, the student newspaper had a front-page story that featured the incident. It read, "Christian group won't allow gay students to be leaders." The following day, the newspaper had an editorial entitled, Why is CCC's discrimination condoned by UW? There was a call to revoke Campus Crusade's charter as an officially recognized student organization. However, Campus Crusade's response was to confront them. But they refused to do it on their opponent's terms. The following week, Campus Crusade for Christ handed out 10,000 flyers at the foot of the major traffic points leading to the University of Washington in Seattle campus. The purpose of the flyer was to reframe the issue as censorship rather than intolerance. They use the words small vocal minority instead of homosexual or homosexuality because the latter words would be watered down the issue. Then Campus Crusade accused the small vocal minority of being hypocritical, of undermining true diversity, of seeking to ban free speech, and of practicing censorship. These were all done to put the opponents in a defensive posture. The flyer ended with the question, "What are they afraid you might hear?" which allowed Campus Crusade to segue into their real issue, the God of the Bible and of Jesus Christ. For the next 3 months, Campus Crusade for Christ's opponents attacked. Campus Crusade strategically ignored their issue, and they kept putting them in the defensive posture and focused their issue, talking about God. Campus Crusade wanted to debate the cause and not the effect. After a few months, Campus Crusade opponents lost ground in the debate, and they stopped altogether. So this Brad Bright, he's the author of the book God is the Issue, Recapturing the Culture Initiative. He uses this encounter at the University of Washington in Seattle to reframe the issue. It was not just about who can be in a leadership position in Campus Crusade for Christ. It was about who is God and what does he require. So they reframed the issue to get back to the root and not to the symptom, not to the effect, but to the cause. And the focus then was redirected back to God, the God of the Bible. So that's what we're going to see today. There will be some heat turned up on Jesus and his followers by the religious leadership, seeking for a wrong answer that they might accuse him and to get rid of him and to quiet his voice and to silence his message. That's happening today in religious realms. Our constitutional liberties, our religious liberty, our freedoms as Christians, they're trying to silence this voice. They started in the early 1900s, taking the Bible out of the schools, taking prayer out of the schools, and so we no longer have a voice in public education. However, we are taught here by Jesus' own examples. Remember, whatever the issue is, we bring it back to the Bible and the God of the Bible. Up until now, in our text this morning, remember the Sanhedrin, the Jewish high court, the heavyweights in Jewish religion came to accuse Jesus or try to get Jesus trapped on the issue of authority. By whose authority have you cleansed the temple? By whose authority have you received the praise and the worship of Messiah the King? And Jesus redirects and says, you know what? I know why you're here. I know your intention. You tell me, was John's authority from God or from men? And they say, we can't tell. We're not going to tell you. And then Jesus says, I'm not going to tell you by whose authority I come from either. By the way, everything that I've done up until now tells you my authority comes from heaven. All the healings, all the miracles, everything that I've said, everything that I've done shows you that my authority comes from above, from God, but you won't listen. So the Sanhedrin, they don't get the goods on Jesus. They cannot approach him theologically because it doesn't hold. Everything that he's done proves that he is the Messiah and his authority is from heaven. So instead of approaching from a theological perspective to trap Jesus, they went away, they strategized, and reverted from theological now to political. If we can't get him in the theological realm, let's attack him by the political realm. And that's where we jump into today. They try to trap Jesus in his words so that he will, whatever he says, yes or no to this question that's about to come up, so that he will be marginalized, be set aside by one side or the other. So this is the question in regards to paying taxes to Caesar. So let's look at our text here, and let's focus now. Jesus will reframe the issue, that it's not about taxes. It's about the God of the Bible. All right? Mark chapter 12, beginning in verse 13. We'll read to verse 17 here as we look at the question of tribute tax to Caesar. Mark 12, verse 13 says, "And they send unto him certain of the Pharisees and of the Herodians to catch him in his words." The word catch means to entrap, like you would trap a wild animal. And when they were come, they say unto him, Master, we know that thou art true and carest for no man. For thou regardest not the person of men, but teachest the way of God in truth. Is it lawful to give tribute to Caesar or not? Shall we give or shall we not give? But he, knowing their hypocrisy, said unto them, Why tempt ye me? Bring me a penny that I may see it. And they brought it, and he said unto them, Whose is this image and superscription? And they said unto him, Caesar's. And Jesus answering said unto them, Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. And they marveled at him. So here they come with a political hot potato. And he doesn't handle it the way they want him to handle it. The Pharisees here. The Pharisees asked this question again to trap or to hunt him like a wild animal in a trap. And the Pharisees, if you remember, they were the separatists, they were the nationalistic, alt-right kind of a group. And the Herodians come as well, representing the other side. The Pharisees, the religious side, the Herodians, the political side. The Herodians represented the political establishment. They were for Herod and the Herod family. The Roman rulers put Herod and his family in charge politically of Jerusalem and Judea, of Israel. So there are two sides here. And depending on what his answer to the question is, should you, yes or no? If yes, okay, the Pharisees would handle it. If no, then the Herodians would handle it. The Pharisees essentially said, in their own philosophy and thinking, no, absolutely not. We should not pay taxes to Caesar because it's disloyalty to our God. We are not owned or governed by any other country or person other than God himself. That was their philosophy and attitude towards paying the tax. The tax was the poll tax. The poll tax was required of every Jewish male. And essentially, once a year, every Jewish male would have to pay a poll tax. It was a silver coin with the value of something less than our quarter, but it was a nuisance. It was an irritation to the common people. And the question was to put Jesus in a rock and a hard place. If he says, yes, we should pay tax, and the people were trusting him, believing in him to be Messiah the King, if he says, yes, pay tax, then they would think, the people, popular opinion would be, we can't support somebody who says they're the Messiah, the King, and then pay taxes to another government. And so he would lose popular support from the people, among the common people. Again, they're trying to put him between a rock and a hard place. A yes or a no answer would give the Pharisees ammunition either way to make charges against Jesus. Okay, if he said no, then they would tell the authorities. And the Herodians would hustle Jesus to the Roman authorities saying, this man says not to pay taxes to the government. If he says no, he's branded as a rebel, put on trial as a traitor for not supporting Rome. If he says yes, again, he's offending the people, he loses popular opinion, and so half the crowd at least would no longer support Jesus as Messiah the King. So what do we see from Jesus' answer here? How he reframes the question and redirects back to the real topic at hand. It says that he perceived their wickedness in Matthew 22, parallel passage. It says he recognized their craftiness, Luke 20:23, the other parallel passage. So their hypocrisy reveals their hidden motive. And Jesus, by asking this question, why are you tempting me? He's addressing their hypocrisy. He's putting on them the defensive. They're not asking, all this flattery that they give Jesus, it wasn't to get at an answer that they might live. It was to get an answer that they might charge Jesus with either rebellion or being complicit with Rome. So why tempt ye me? He essentially attacks them, puts them on the defensive for being disingenuous and hypocritical. So he, knowing their hypocrisy, replies in a way that avoids the dilemma. Or essentially, you know what he does? The phrase, the horns of a dilemma. They put him on the horns of a dilemma. a rock in a hard place. And essentially, he lays hands of both horns and redirects them to the right issue. He says in verse 15, "Bring me a penny that I may see it." And remember the money changers in the temple? He threw them out. He threw them out. They're the ones that would exchange temple coin for secular coin. So they had to find a money changer, and it was probably the coin that they used for trade outside of the temple anyway. So they get the coin, and Jesus asks, whose inscription is on this? Whose picture? Whose image? There's a picture of an image of Caesar, and with some handwriting about who Caesar is. And they ask him the question, should we give to Rome tax or should we not give? Jesus changes the verb and says, it's not about giving, you should pay. It's not giving to Rome, it's paying Rome for what they've provided. Taxes are not a gift to the government. They're a debt that we owe in return for government providing for us protection, military, fire, police protection, social service, national defense. So, yes, essentially he says, you are not to give, but you are to pay what you owe to the government. Government was established and must be supported. Their logic was either this or that, you can't have both. But Jesus was saying, listen, it's both and. There is no conflict between your duty to God and your duty to government. Since it's God who established human government for our good, we're obligated to respect the officials and obey the law. And we are to pay for the services rendered. The Apostle Paul would say this, the rulers that be, the government, the powers that be, are set in order by God. They're established, ordained by God, and you are to support them. In fact, Paul goes on to say that those who work in the government are ministers of God unto good. They actually serve God for your good and for my good in this government. They're to create and provide an environment of law and order, a place for peaceful living, that the righteous men, righteous people might live. Caesar, in essence, is God's servant. And Caesar's government must be supported by the payment of taxes. Again, this did not conflict with God's right to rule the whole earth. This does not nullify the fact that the Messiah will come and he will sit on the throne in Jerusalem and rule the entire world. But in the meantime, Jesus again points them back to the coin. Caesar's coin, Caesar's image represented his authority over Israel. And the truth is, at the same time, the image of God is stamped upon you and me. We are created in the image of God. And we must pay back to God the things that are God's. So the answer that he gives, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's and render unto God the things that are God. That just utterly blows the Pharisees and the Herodians away. He got out of it. We set the trap and he got out of it. And what he said is amazing. Now, if we break it down, what he did, he puts them on the defensive, and then he reframes the issue. Look, why are you tempting me? You're being hypocritical. I know you're trying to trap me. He reframes the question. He doesn't avoid the discussion, but his real goal was not to settle the issue about payment of taxes. His real goal was, look, let's get back to the God of the Bible and what he requires. The God of the Bible requires this, that you render unto him the things that are his. And what is God's? Everything. It is all God's. Your very soul is God's. Your next breath, your next heartbeat is God's. It all belongs to him. So they were grudgingly amazed at his answer. he takes the initiative and he redirects, he reframes, and changes the terms of the debate to focus on what does God require? God requires it all from you. Now, in the specific context of the Gospels, what does it mean to render God everything that is God's? It means this: I've sent my Messiah. He is the King, and he's told you to take up your cross and follow me. It means your very life, that belongs to God. You ought to give it to him in order to live it for him. Your life is even God. So when we get drawn into debates, because it's going to happen increasingly more and more in our country and our world, especially in our nation at this time. And so as the debate rages, whatever the topic is, we always bring back the issue to the God of the Bible, because that's the answer. Everything that we are and have belongs to God, so we're responsible to God. So every issue that comes up in the life, we go back to God. And what does God want? He wants to redeem us. He wants to change us from the inside out. He wants us to live in life for him, that we might fulfill everything that he's created us to be, to fulfill our potential for him as image bearers of God, as representatives of God on this earth. So take up your cross, follow him, because it's all his anyway. So have you rendered to God what is his? Your very life, everything that you have is his. And so they go away. They can't get him. They can't trap him. However, another group comes along who thinks they've got this. We're going to get Jesus on this issue here. So the Sadducees come. The Sadducees are what I would consider the liberal theologians of our day. They don't believe in the Bible, and they don't believe in the power of God. And so they come, and they bring up another issue, trying to prove that Jesus is not the Messiah. Now, they have something at stake here. They believe that there is no resurrection, so this life is all that there is. If there is a continued life after death, it's the same as you have now. They also don't believe that there are angels. They also don't believe that there is going to be a resurrection of the dead where your soul is reunited with your body for final judgment. They don't believe these things. But there is something that's happening around Jerusalem that's causing them to have to take action, and that's this. Just days before, a man had been dead for 3 days. And Jesus says to this tombstone, this tomb where he is, he says, "Lazarus, rise, come forth." So there is a man who was known to be dead for at least 3 days, walking around in Jerusalem saying, "I was dead physically, but now I'm alive." And everybody was, this was the how do you call that today's topic? This was the viral incident here. Everybody knows, everybody's heard. It's gone viral in Jerusalem. That this man was dead, but has been made alive. And what's the proof? There he is, right there. So they've got stake here, trying to prove that it's impossible for him to have been revived. So let's look at the next few verses here as we quickly finish. So after he puts the Pharisees and the Herodians, the religious and the political, in their place, here comes the religious aristocracy, the Sadducees. Then come unto him the Sadducees, which say there is no resurrection, and they asked him, saying, "Master, Moses wrote unto us, if a man's brother die and leave his wife behind him and leave no children, that his brother should take his wife and raise up seed unto his brother. Now there were 7 brethren, and the first took a wife, and dying left no seed. And the second took her, and died, neither left he any seed. And the third likewise. And the 7 had her, and left no seed. Last of all, the woman died also. In the resurrection, therefore, when they shall rise, whose wife shall she be of them? For the 7 had her to wife." So here's a question about the resurrection. They don't believe in resurrection. And so the Sadducees here, the Jewish aristocracy, made up of mostly the high priestly crowd, as well as the rich laymen, the wealthy families of Jerusalem, they asked this question about the resurrection. their doctrinal system of belief. They only believed the first 5 books of the Bible, the Pentateuch, from Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. They only believed those 5 books. Everything else were fairy tales to them. So they didn't believe the majority of the Old Testament. So they confidently held this position that there was no resurrection. They also denied the existence of angels or spirits. They essentially didn't believe in the spiritual realm. So they come confidently here with the question. They think, we got him. He can't answer this. This is our go-to question when we debate with the Pharisees anyway. Let's ask him this question. They reminded Jesus of Deuteronomy 25. In Deuteronomy 25, Moses establishes what we call the Levirate marriage. In other words, if a man marries and he dies, they have no children, the widow then must be married by the man's brother. In order to preserve the family name and to keep the wealth, keep the land and the property in the family, the next brother in line would have to marry this widow to keep the wealth. And it's stipulated, he's got to marry the widow so that we can protect the family name and protect the family property. So when they come to Jesus, they didn't come like the Pharisees did. There was no flattering. There was no buttering up. They just got it out there, being blunt, confident that he cannot answer this question like he answered the questions of the Pharisees and the Herodians. But they come without flattery, but at the same time, their motive is wrong. They didn't want to learn. They were just trying to prove him foolish. They believed that the life of the future, if there was any life in the future after death, was just a continuation of life on earth as is. So the question, whose wife is she going to be if she had 7 husbands? In the resurrection, which one will be the husband? Again, probably their go-to argument against the Pharisees. So they used this story of the one woman and the 7 husbands in order to make people who believed in the resurrection seem foolish. Come on, I can hear them saying it with a snicker in their voices. Whose wife is she going to be? She's got, 7 husbands. How are they going to handle that in heaven? They were making light out of life and death issues. They were talking about the afterlife in a frivolous and a demeaning way. The truth is, every one of us is closer to death every day. I hear, a baby in here, and that's a beautiful thing. Here's a baby. One person said in this way, most of us spend our whole lives avoiding the thought of death. So what do we have here? Jesus responds, is there an afterlife, is essentially the question. The truth is, for some of us, death won't be long. And for others, it might be soon. The older we get, the more we think about it. Is there an afterlife? Is there a resurrection of soul and body after death? Will you see believing loved ones in heaven? Is there a resurrection of the just and the unjust? Will the unjust, unbelieving, unregenerate, unsaved be resurrected unto judgment, into hell? And here are the Sadducees saying, no, never, it's never going to happen because there is no afterlife, there is no resurrection. And again, probably with a sarcastic snicker in the voice. Whose wife is she going to be, really? But Jesus says otherwise. And here's his response. Look at verse 24. Mark 12:24 says, and Jesus, answering, said unto them, do you not therefore err? That is, the word means to roam, to stray, to deceive yourself. Do you not therefore err because ye know not the Scriptures, neither the power of God? For when they shall rise from the dead, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are as the angels which are in heaven. And as touching the dead that they rise, have you not read in the book of Moses how in the bush God spake unto him, saying, I am the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but the God of the living. Ye therefore do greatly err. So the answer to Jesus is this. Going back to the Bible, he says essentially, there is no marriage in heaven. That's the basic answer. There is no marriage in heaven. There's no need for it. So to Jesus, the answer to every question was in the Scriptures and not in man's own thinking, getting people back to the Bible and the God of the Bible. Because the Sadducees were not being hypocritical, he doesn't rebuke them. He just says, you're mistaken. In fact, you're dead wrong. And because of your wrong conclusion about reading Moses' letters or his writings, because you're wrong, you're going astray and you're deceiving yourself. He says, verse 25, for when they shall rise, it is going to happen. Neither marry nor are they given in marriage, but are as the angels which are in heaven. So referring to the resurrection of the just, he asserts, look, this is a reality. This is going to happen. There will be a day of resurrection. And the Sadducees failed to see, look, if you believe in God, you should believe in his word. And Jesus says on 2 points, here's 2 things that you're getting wrong. You don't believe the Bible, and you don't believe that God has power to do it. Again, they were the materialists, the naturalists. They can only think on the physical realm, that there is no spiritual realm. And Jesus refers them back to, if you only believe the books of the Bible that Moses wrote, the first 5 books, well, what did Moses write? Remember in Exodus chapter 3, verses 5 to 12, you don't have to go there, I'll summarize it. Moses, about 80 years old, he's been a shepherd in the wilderness for 40 years, and he sees a burning bush on the top of the mountain. He goes and examines this burning bush. It is burning and it's not consumed. And a voice comes out and says, take off your shoes, you're on holy ground. And then here's the exact words of verse 6, Exodus 3. God is speaking after he says to take off your shoes, you're on holy ground. God says, I am the God of thy father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face. Later, God would say, because I am the God of your fathers, who are dead, but they're not dead. Back in verse 6 of Mark 12, or 26 of Mark 12, Jesus uses the present tense. Remember what Moses said? I am. That's present tense. I am the God of Jacob. I am the God of Abraham. I am the God of your fathers. I am currently, presently, still am. I'm not the God of those who don't exist anymore. They still exist and they worship me. In the present tense, he's not the God of those who are dead. He's the God of those who are still living, awaiting the day of the resurrection, when soul will be rejoined with body. The past tense, if Jesus would have used the past tense, that would have been appropriate. But God is still the God of the living. Even though they've been dead for hundreds of years by this point, he is still their God, and they are still worshiping him. So Jesus says there is life after death, and there will also be a resurrection of the just. There is a hope for future resurrection. And the resurrection will not be like it is here on earth at this time. But when you get resurrected, when you receive your resurrection body, you will have spiritual and physical, the same body that Jesus had, a glorified body. And that body will work as a glorified body does. But in heaven, there will be no need for marriage. It will be a whole new kind of existence. Marriage in this present is for this present life only. In heaven, there will be no need for sex, for reproduction, or families to maintain the population. There will only be one relationship between the glorified saints, and that relationship will include perfect joy and perfect love. The power of God, which Jesus alludes to, is going to change life on this new plane, this new existence, so differently that you will be as the angels of heaven. The angels of heaven don't reproduce, they don't get married. The marriage relationship is beautiful now. It's meaningful as it is right now, is going to be insignificant to what God is doing by his power in heaven. There will be no need for marriage. The best things of this world are only a hint of the things which we will enjoy in heaven. Will we still know each other? Yes. Sometimes I have fun thinking about what I'm going to do with a glorified body. You can appear, disappear. That's the way Jesus did it in the New Testament. But there will be a resurrection. And for us, the believer, this should be comforting. Yes, one day, someone will fill you with embalming fluid. That'll happen to me. And 6 men will carry me. Probably 8. Okay, 6 or 7 will carry me and plant me in the ground one day. But that's not the end of the story. I will be in a disembodied state, enjoying fellowship with God until the day of the resurrection, where my body will be rejoined with my soul. And I will live in heaven doing God's will, enjoying His favor, enjoying His fellowship and the fellowship of God and men. And to the Christian, listen to this. There will be no more tears, no more suffering, no more pain, for the former things are passed away. There is going to be a resurrection, and we are going to enjoy it. So the fault now with the Sadducees, as we apply what Jesus is doing here, He tells them, you are going astray. You don't know the Bible, and you don't know the power of God. That's the age in which we live. The smart aleck, Sadducee, unbelieving, have been powerfully put down. Jesus brings them back to the Bible and back to the God of the Bible. You need to know the Scriptures, and you need to know the power of God. Because of the illiteracy, the biblical illiteracy that we experience today, people have a shallow understanding, an incorrect understanding of the Scriptures. In my own secular college days, before I was a Christian, I remember secular professors just hammering the Bible, especially in regards to child training, mostly psychology professors. But they were taking the Bible out of context and applying it and using it to discredit the Bible. If I knew then what I knew now, I would correct them and saying, you do err, right? You are greatly mistaken, and you're deceiving yourselves. That's not what the Scripture means right there. A little under 2 months ago, I spoke to a man who was very eloquent. He could quote Scripture. He even knew, you could tell he was under Bible study. He even knew that the New Testament word for James, the name for James, is the Hebrew word for Jacob. He even knew that. But he was tying in Buddhist teaching with Christian teaching, with the Bible. And I told him, God's going to judge all men one day. And he said, the Bible teaches that God doesn't judge. And I was like, what? And I rebuked him. I said, listen, from the very beginning, have you not read Genesis 3 to Adam and Eve? You can have everything in this garden, but don't eat of the tree of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, for the day you eat thereof, you will surely die. If that's not judgment, I don't know what is. From the very beginning, God is a judging God, but a righteous and a loving judging God. And then I told him, you know enough of the Bible to be dangerous. And then he said, what? I shook him. He says one of the tenets of Buddhism is not to cause harm. I'm like, you are sending people to hell by saying that God doesn't judge, because He does. In fact, Hebrews 9:27 says, it's appointed unto men once to die, and after this the judgment. Acts 17, God has appointed a day in which He will judge the world in righteousness. One day you will stand before God, all of us will, and will be judged. He was trying to deny the Word of God and the power of God. And I brought him back to the Bible and the God of the Bible. Now today, real quick, I know I've gone long here. Examples today which will address you, will touch you one way or another. Violence in public schools. How do we bring that back to the Bible? Hate crimes, which pretty soon they'll accuse Christians of being. Tolerance. How do we bring that issue back to the Bible? Diversity, ethnic and religious. Here's what we can do. I am all for tolerance. I'm all for diversity. You know, in fact, the Bible says this. There will be people from every kindred, nation, and tongue worshiping God. Terrorism, abortion. Yeah, I'm against those things. You know what? You know what's common today in non-biblical secular counseling is the question, how does that make you feel? Right? School counselors, secular counselors, psychologists, how does that make you feel? To give you a shortcut, to help you to reason, to bring the issues back to the Bible, ask this question. Oh yeah, this flood, this hurricane, this is terrible. You know what God says about coming judgment? How do you think God feels about this hurricane in Texas? You bring it back to the Bible. You bring it back to the God of the Bible. Always bring the issues back to the God of the Bible. Always bring the issue back to the God of the Bible, because God is the issue of the Bible. Our view of God will determine our behavior, and what we need to do is to learn to link every topic back to, what does God think about this? Are you helping people to discover the Bible? Are you helping people to discover the God of the Bible? Let's pray.